Just to kick things off, we know, and God, I hate saying this, that the political landscape in Alberta has radically changed. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists just to start out with, give us some idea of what you expect from this new government, horrific however it may be, and how's it going to impact the work that you're going to do. So I'll start out with Joel.
Sure, yeah. I think things have definitely changed radically. They changed radically, obviously, 4 years ago, too, and I think the election 4 years ago changed the political landscape forever, really, or for the foreseeable future in a positive way. But obviously, we've seen a backslide now. We've got a regressive government that's in power and is going to do some scary things. I think we're going to see definitely attacks on our public services, which affects a lot of you folks in this room, but affects more than workers on the front lines. It affects all Albertans, and I think that's when we're talking about what kinds of messages we need to get out to Albertans, it's that every single Albertan will be affected by those cuts, whatever form they may come in, and by the corresponding, I think, wealth transfer up to the wealthy that we're going to see through corporate tax cuts and through other means. I think we're in for a lot of attacks, and I think we're going to explore lots of different ways forward throughout this discussion, but sticking together and supporting each other, I think, is the most important thing, both within this room, but outside of this room, too. And so I'm looking forward to a lot of discussion over the next little while about how we're going to do that together.
Great, thank you, Joel. Sandra, please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to participate, I think, in this very timely discussion. As Joel said, there's going to be a lot of scary things. And I'd like to start out by saying that we're not fear-mongering when we're saying this, certainly. I think you have heard from your other speakers about owning a narrative that needs to come out as a joint kind of effort in terms of protecting what we had gained over the last 4 years. But when it comes to healthcare, I think our concern, it's not a fear, it's a concern, that the UCP's direction for healthcare comes directly from their platform, where they talk about maintaining or sometimes increasing health spending to maintain a universal system which is publicly funded. What is not being said about this platform is the fact that they don't throw in there with the important words and distinction, publicly delivered. And for us, that's a huge concern. They, in their platform, if you have had an opportunity to look at it, they make mention of Brian Day, who is currently taking the BC government to court because he's not allowed to extra bill and not allowed to profit from the illnesses of others. He also makes mention of the fact that the UCP government is going to live by the spirit of the Chao-Li decision in Quebec that encouraged insurance companies to have a bigger role in determining who gets access to healthcare and who doesn't, instead of talking about how we need to focus on the importance of the Canada Health Act. Our advocacy work actually reflects that egalitarian legislation that we implemented in 1984, and it talks about equity and fairness. And that's what we stand to lose in the next 4 years if we don't organize and be ready to take back the narrative, to take back the values that we need to have. So in terms of the work, it's very clear what we need to do when it comes to the attacks that we will see in public health care.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Ricardo.
Thanks, Rory. And
yeah, don't be afraid to scream and shout.
Yeah.
And holler.
Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in this discussion. One of the challenges of this type of setup, as we kind of come down the line, and I feel sorry for Jared at the end, is the instinct is always to say, yeah, what they said, right? Because they've covered it, but we've had a shift, and I'm reluctant to use the word a radical shift, because in the short term, yes, it's a radical change that we're seeing now from where we have been over the last 4 years. But in the trajectory, my bio said I've been doing this. On Wednesday was officially my 17th anniversary at the Parkland Institute, right? And what we've got going on today is not a radical shift from where most of us started out when we were doing union organizing, labor organizing, public sector advocacy, right? We're back to where we were. So yes, it's a radical shift in the short term, but in the long term, I'd say that for many of us, it's the reason that we're here. I know certainly for our organizations, we were all created as an antidote to this type of political moment. That's why we exist. So that's important. And in addition to what we're going to see in terms of kind of new trickle-up legislation for finances and the tax system, in terms of the attacks on public services, yes, that's going to happen. We've been there before. We know how to fight those battles. We know how to fight back against that. But I think one of the big shifts that we're maybe not as prepared for, and that where we need to look at some of our allies and the work that they're doing, particularly some of our younger allies and the work they're doing, is in the downright hatred and meanness and bigotry that we saw over the course of the election period, the rise in your face, high-profile racism, the rise in your face, high-profile homophobia, the kind of growing trends towards increased misogyny in this province. And I think the decline, the absolute decline of the levels of public discourse, how we engage with each other, how we talk about politics, if we talk about policy, I think those represent a big shift that's not just happened since Election Day, but that's been growing over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. Even while we had an NDP government, we started to see the growth of these voices. We started to see the kind of high-profile hatred and bigotry becoming more and more prevalent in our communities. And I think that's a shift that we ignore at our own peril. So I'll just stop there for now.
Thanks very much, Ricardo. Jared, please.
Sorry.
Hi, everyone. I think we didn't introduce who our organizations are, and I think that might be important for some context. So I'll start off, and then I invite you to all, y'all fill in the blanks. I'm Jared. I use he, him, they, them pronouns. I'm with the Alberta Workers' Health Centre. I've been there for about 12 years, and my education, I don't have sort of a lot of letters after my name. A lot of my education came from people in this room and came from the labor movement. And it came significantly, sort of within kind of labor circles, but also from the people in the organizations that I'm sitting up here and privileged to be up here with today. To be able to draw some of my health and safety experience and knowledge that I'm able to sort of try to help others learn and stand up for various rights, but also to tie very specific sort of health and safety rights and health and safety education to larger issues of social justice. And so I'm very happy to be here because I think that health and safety, when we talk about the work that the Workers' Health Centre does, is largely prevention, health and safety prevention education for a lot of people who tend to be more vulnerable to health and safety issues. And it's convenient to sort of put things into silos, but really we're talking about human beings who happen to work and happen to be screwed over in the workplace for various reasons and may or may not have protections and may or may not have communities that can support them in various ways. So the Workers' Health Centre is a charity. We're a not-for-profit. We're created by labor, recognizing a need for prevention and that health and safety is actually something that is important whether you're unionized or not. We've been around since the early 80s. Our core funding comes from everyone in this room. Comes from affiliates to the Federation of Labor, so I thank you for that. And it allows us to do programming that will help support people, what I see as becoming health and safety activists. And by health and safety activists, I mean champions of people looking for health and safety in the workplace and outside in their communities and their families. Just to build now on what Ricardo was saying about the rise of hate, I think when we talk about workplace health and safety, we talk about all the gains that we've made, right? And so we were building a lot of stuff. And that's what's really kind of terrifying right now is that it's so easy to destroy things. It takes a long time, it takes relationships, it takes courage and a lot of work to build things, and they can be torn down very easily. And it's very hard to build things up again, as we see in our public services. Shout outs to Steel for their Westray work over decades, right? To everyone in this room who's fought tirelessly. And with the rise of hate, I would like to say there are specific workplace health and safety issues we all kind of identify, workload issues, all of these things. With the rise of hate, though, I think it's really important to go to recognize that that seeps into our workplaces as well. We've actually gone, like if you look at it, the yellow vest movement, the yellow vests they're a device that are supposed to protect workers. And instead, they're actually creating fear of racist acts and anti-immigrant acts. So they've gone from becoming a worker protection to becoming a worker hazard. And so those are concerning things. And I think, so I just want to open it up to say that there's a broad definition of health and safety, that we can't separate these things, that we tend to silo through legislation otherwise. They're actually part of what we're looking for in terms of justice, of building a better society for everyone. I'll leave it at that for now, I think.
That's great, Jared. So, my next question, and you all touched on this a little bit. There's been a real question about the public discourse in Alberta, and you know, I took a little bit of stick after our convention in March when I said that Jason Kenney was looking to fuck the public service, but, and I believe that. So I'll throw it open to the panel. Is there a problem with public discourse in Alberta? And if there, you know, and what are those problems, and how can we in the labor movement and our allies, you know, in civil society and social justice, you know, change the discussion and bring about, you know, changes in public discourse?
I can start with that one. This is something that we talk about all the time, in that the change in discourse that we have seen over the years has been more of a move towards that individualism versus the collectivism that allows us to understand the importance and the values that kind of underlie our public services, especially when it comes to healthcare. Because we hear all the time that people will say, well, if I want to pay for private healthcare, why shouldn't I be allowed? If I want to do this, then why shouldn't I be allowed? You know, I've had to wait so long for this, and I've had to wait so long for that, and I have the money, so I'm going to get it. And we don't propose that people should be waiting unnecessarily in wait lists, that we should be improving our public health care to ensure that wait times are addressed in a more public way, public solutions to a public problem, but definitely is that move away. And I think in a lot of ways what we're tasked with is reviving and ensuring that we go back to the values. And every time that we have those conversations with people is about them understanding why it is that we created our public health care. You know, we made a pledge over 50 years ago that said that no Canadian would ever have to die because they can't afford health care, and that no Canadian would ever have to go bankrupt because they can't afford health care. We need to go back to that place. We need to be able to address privatization of our healthcare system from that lens, from that narrative, from that rhetoric.
The Parkland Institute, as you know, is a think tank. Our stock in trade is research. And one of the most concerning things over the last 5 to 6 years has been a hardcore move to what Stephen Colbert a few years ago termed as truthiness, right? This sense that it doesn't matter what's actually true. If you feel that something might be true, then it's just as valid. And we've seen that repeatedly here in Alberta. We've seen it in platforms, we've seen it in debates in the legislature, we've seen it in materials from government and materials from the opposition. This sense that it doesn't matter if we can back this up. It doesn't matter if this is true. If we say it loudly enough, then I can argue from that position. And what that's done is it's created this realm where what we do, it's created what I've been referring to as the Twitterization of public discourse, where what you do is you dig your heels in and you start yelling out there. And that's all you do. And you yell from your feelings without necessarily backing it up with anything. And when I say we've been doing this, yes, we can all agree that Jason Kenney's been doing this and that his platform had no research credentials to it whatsoever, but we've become responsible. We've become complicit in doing that as well on the left, and that we've stopped processing where ideas come from, and we've actually stopped developing ideas and have started yelling at other people in sound bites. And that's problematic. A, because we're not getting dialogue, it's not going to get us anywhere. And B, because the things that we're tossing out there aren't grounded in anything. They aren't grounded in any actual facts, in any kind of research, in any kind of evidence. There's just things, and often these things include numbers. There have been numbers tossed around on both sides of the pipeline debate that have, quite frankly, just been made up. Numbers that somebody pulled out of the air and said, we stand to gain this much money, or we're losing this much money, or a pipeline will do this, right? They're not actually real things. And at Parkland, we've spent time and energy and resources trying to inject data into those debates. And we get shouted down from both sides because people aren't interested right now in what's actually true and evidence-based. The bigger interest is in what sounds good and what I can yell about. And that's a concerning thing, because if we're going to move forward, we need to actually be moving forward towards something. And if our ideas aren't grounded in research and evidence, then we have no clue what we're proposing to move forward to. So I think for me and for us at Parkland, that's one of the biggest concerns in terms of this changing public discourse.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think, a big part of what we try to do at Public Interest Alberta, Ricardo described Parkland as a think tank. We talk about ourselves as a do tank, which is actually a Preston Manning phrase. We're not the same as Preston Manning and his folks, but in a lot of ways, what we try to do is get that information that's grounded in evidence, the kind of research that Parkland does, and get it out to the public and try to create a more informed debate. So that's, I think, one of the things that Labor does, that the people in this room do, and the organizations in this room, is invest in organizations like us to help to make that debate much more healthy than it otherwise would be. But I think one area where that's been made worse over time is by governments that haven't meaningfully engaged citizens and civil society around the province in policy making and policy development. And I don't think it's a partisan thing, actually. I think it's something that's been getting worse over time, and I think the government we just lost and the governments before that, and I don't think did it that well. And I think the government we've got now is going to do it even worse. We had Jason Kenney a few months ago say that public consultations would just bog down his policy agenda. So he doesn't even want to pretend to do public consultation. Even the kinds of token ones that we've seen over the years, I don't think are going to happen. But we need to find ways as civil society groups to create the expectation among the Alberta public that governments do better and that they take us more seriously, and that the things that from working on the front lines in our hospitals and schools and in our public buildings and out on work sites, that those voices are brought to politicians and to governments, and demand that they hear us, and demand that, not only that they invite you to a consultation where you sit for half an hour, you're lucky if you get that, but that they actually listen, and that it has a measurable impact on what government is doing. Because I don't think people feel like that happens. Even those of us who sometimes get invited to consultations by one government or another, I don't think governments have been good at meaningfully engaging, and we need to demand that they do better.
Oh, what they said, I guess. Hey? I think something about what each of you has said here, and particularly about this sort of we are consumers more than anything else, right? It plays into this sort of we are individuals and we are consumers, and that's our power, as opposed to any kind of democratic agency. And even the way that our focus right now, I think about this in terms of all the legislative gains, particularly for health and safety, employment standards, a suite of workers' rights, that we're focused on rights. And that is problematic. It's useful, but they're individual rights. The way our systems are set up, they're largely complaint-driven things that exist, and they're fine until something goes wrong, and then we have to appeal it, or we actually have to have the power to access our rights. And some of us have that, and a lot of us don't. And a lot of us don't even know that we have those rights to begin with, or it's just not worth creating a ruckus over, right? Because you've got precarious residency status, you're working poor, you're precariously employed, all of these things. So I think there's what the discourse is, we tend to focus on the rights aspect of things and not on the power imbalance aspect of things. And specifically, I think the challenge for us all in this room and outside of this room is how do we collectively move forward to break up, what are the tactics to use, so we're not just in these individual little pools. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely, Jared. So, kind of, and again, I want to build on some of the things you guys have talked about. You know, since the provincial election, you know, there's been meetings and we've come together and we've talked about, you know, what's the next 4 year going to look like within the labor movement. I know within your organizations as well. So one of the things that's come out is, you know, we need to connect with people, you know, within the labor movement and the civil society movement. And one of the things, you know, that we talk about is, you know, there's a lot of anger out there, and this anger, you know, on the other side, the right wing, they've used populism, you know, trying to connect with people, and there's been some call for progressive populism, left-wing populism. So I guess I'd ask the panel, you know, is that something that you would agree with? You know, do we need to, you know, fine-tune our messages, make them, you know, more popular, more understandable, and if that's the case, what would that look like from your guys' perspective?
I guess I'll pull the gender card. I'm always going first.
Yeah, at this point, it's whoever gets the mic first now.
Doesn't matter. In terms of the message that we need to get out there, I think everybody has touched a bit. We have the good luck, I guess, of working with frontline workers who truly understand what needs to be done to fix the system, the areas that need to be addressed before we even begin to kind of hoping to see a cultural shift within our healthcare system. And sometimes that voice is not what gets heard. And for us, understanding from a labor perspective is that working conditions are care conditions, not only in healthcare, but also in other public services. You know, how well our workers are able to do their jobs, how much resources they're given to do their jobs effectively is what impacts the services that ultimately Albertans receive. And so for us is actually getting people to understand the importance of the work that each one of you does on behalf of Albertans. And that is an essential message. You know, we, Friends of Medicare is a nonpartisan organization. We do political advocacy, but we're nonpartisan. And I'll let you know why. It's not because we don't, you know, support governments that you know, whose premise is public health care. But we have tons of people, tons of Albertans who are not necessarily from what we would consider the political side of public health care, but people that understand the importance of public health care and how that impacts their lives and their families. So I think it's a way of rescuing, again, I'll go back to the whole concept of values of equity and fairness that underlies our healthcare system, and that's what we need to kind of get out there as a simple message. And it's creating those spaces for organizations such as ours and labor and community and seniors groups and as such that all have the common goal of a public health care system that works for all based on need and not ability to pay.
Yeah, I'll jump back in, and I think I'd like to talk, if I can, about sort of the overall premise of your question, Rory, and that's about the importance of influencing the public discussion, which is a big part of what we're set up to do as an organization. And, you know, we can talk, I think, about what do we need to do over the next 4 years, but I think in a lot of ways, the work that you know, all four of us come from nonpartisan organizations. The work that we do, you know, we hope has an effect on electoral cycles. We believe that it does, but it goes beyond that too, and it's able to look at the longer term. So it's extremely important that we elect good people every 4 years. That we elect good parties that share our values. But I think it's important for the longer term that we talk to Albertans and talk to the public and get people to understand why public health care is a priority, why public education is a priority, why building a universal child care system is a priority, why addressing climate change is a priority. Because if people don't understand that, if the public doesn't understand that, you're going to have trouble electing good people in the short term. You know, this is the long term where we need to be having those meaningful discussions. So it can't be just about who do you vote for 4 years from now. It has to be I think we need to start from the question of what do we need as a society, where do we need to go, what are the problems first that we're trying to address, and then what are the solutions? And I think we have a lot of those solutions. It's not that they're big mysteries or anything, but you go knocking on a block worth of doors in Edmonton or Calgary or Lloydminster, where I'm from, and you ask people what their priorities are. I don't think they understand these priorities that we're talking about. Your average person doesn't, and we need to change that.
I'm going to be a little provocative here because I want to put forward that our focus on who we're electing is a bit of a cop-out for all of us. I think that we have fallen into a trap where we're dedicating way too much energy into worrying about who we're electing and not enough energy into worrying about what we're empowering these people to do. Markham Hislop spoke yesterday about the Overton window, right? And the thing with the Overton window is that the way you move it is not by finding a safe space in the middle of the Overton window and talking about the things that are popular already. The way you move it is by bringing in ideas that are way outside the Overton window as a way of shifting conversation. That's how the right has done it over the last 45 years, through their think tanks, through their media, through their call-in radio talk shows, through the messages that we get every day, through corporate-funded think tanks that repeat the same things over and over again. Taxes are bad. Unions make us unproductive. Unions are inefficient. Government is inefficient. All of those messages that we've heard over and over again for 40 years, the first time people hear them, they think, that's ridiculous. You hear them 100 times a day for 40 years, and the window is where it is today, on the far right of the spectrum. And if we're not pushing that window back, then it doesn't matter who gets into power, because whoever you elect can only make decisions based on being inside the window. And if we haven't done the work to move the window, it doesn't matter who gets elected. That's our work right now. Those are the conversations we need to have. And we need to be prepared to be uncomfortable in having those conversations. When we sit down and say we want to make allies, we want to work with the youth who are on the front lines today, it means that sometimes those youth activists are going to sit across from us and they're going to say things that make us uncomfortable. They're going to say things about our privilege. They're going to say things about how we've seriously dropped the ball on climate change, and they're going to push us. And if our response to that is to walk away and say, we can't work with you because you're too radical, then we're doing the disservice that we're trying to avoid. We need to find ways to engage. That's how we're going to move the window, and that's how we're going to get change.
Yeah, that's nice. That's actually very inspiring. So today, students were out, right, protesting for a couple of different things, or rallying around different issues. My daughter, who's 15, was one of them. I'm very proud. She attended her school walked out this morning, joining like hundreds and thousands of other students around the province. That's really inspiring to me. It's also a little uncomfortable, right? Like I'm really considering what you're just talking about. Is that I think there's going to be a tendency for us to be very conservative, small c conservative right now in our approach to what we think is going to be attacks on things that we've won or that we've built or that we've held on to, and that's a trap, right? Is what you're saying is just that fight back against things is not enough. It's actually creating room to continue to build, and I think that's really important. Yeah.
That's great, and it's great to hear some radicalism here. So I'll try to be a bit provocative too, because the four of you, you're allies, but you're associated. You're allies of our movement, but you're not within it. And I would ask the panel if you've got, what do you think Labor can do better? What do you think we're doing wrong? Like, what would you like to see from the Labor movement? Because we're talking about you being allied with us, but we're allied with you. So what can we do better in the Labor movement?
I think the labor movement has always been an integral part of any of these civil society groups, and they understand their dual role, I guess, because we all know that unions have a bread and butter, which is to get good working conditions for and bargain good collective agreements and protect their members. But also the organizations that support us are the ones that truly understand the role that civil society has and that common goal that we're all fighting for. Because what we do is not only engage with labor groups, but we also engage with community groups, we engage with seniors groups, with all kinds of people that have the common goal of protecting and expanding our public health care system. So for us, it's a huge opportunity, I think, for labor, for all the membership to engage, to get to know it's a great unifying area. Public services, healthcare is a great unifying area to get memberships involved. And so I guess for us, it's always having that opportunity to go out and meet members at their workplaces and their union halls and their union meetings, because that's the way that we engage, and that's where we hear what is actually happening on the shop floor. And it doesn't just need to be a healthcare union, it can be absolutely every union, because healthcare impacts absolutely everybody. So I guess that's what I'm saying, is that one way that we can work better, that we understand better what is happening to all of us, is actually to have the ability to have the doors open so that groups like us can go in there and understand what's really happening to each one of you as you're trying to provide services to Albertans.
Your financial contributions make our work possible. There's no question. And we could always use more, right? All of us, I think, can say that. We could always use more. So your financial contributions make the work possible, but they don't make the work relevant. What makes our work, all of us, makes our work relevant is the ability to move that work beyond the 400 people in this room who know what we do, who have access to it, who are exposed to it on a regular basis, who get our mailing lists, to move that work beyond the 400 people in this room to the tens of thousands of people that you represent. That reaching out, that having of the conversations, the creating of space for us to have conversations with the broad membership, the using the materials and the campaigns that we're producing to actually work with your members. That's why we're doing it. If we've only got the you give us our money and we do our work side of the equation, you might as well not be giving us our money. Because if it's not disseminating down to the membership, if it's not being used in your own organizing, in your own campaigns, hopefully in your own door-to-door knocking with your members to have conversations about public policy in Alberta, if it's not being used in that way, then I'd say those resources are being wasted, right? So what do we need from labor? Keep giving us our money, but bring your members along in a genuine way. Not just, give us a paragraph or a quarter-page ad in your newsletters or any of those things, but bring your members along so that we can genuinely have the conversations with them, so we can shift the level of discourse, so that you can organize better for the things that matter to the people in this room. That's what we need.
And I think what Ricardo's saying too speaks to a bigger issue as well, as far as what labor's role is, and that's engaging and mobilizing your membership. And I think every union's in a different spot, and I get to come out to lots of union conventions and see the different state of things, and I think every union does some things better and other things not as well as others. So I think first of all we can learn a lot from each other in this room and outside of this room, but I think making sure that your union members are engaged, first in what your union is doing, but also using us, I think, in a way, I think of us as tools that the labor movement has created in order to engage your members. So use us, use those tools, is what I think Ricardo is saying. And then the next step is getting it out to...
I didn't call us tools, though, but I agree.
I was referring just to you, really. No. You can tell we see each other way too much. But I think that's really important, is using us in that way. And I think there are two sides of things. I think a lot of what Ricardo was talking about was using the materials, taking them out, and we certainly want to empower you in that way by producing things that you can use and that are easily digestible. But I think invite us out physically too. All of you are at different places around the province, and I think I can speak for all of us when I say, if you want us to come and talk to your meeting, big or small, Send us an email and invite us, and we'll come out. Like no matter what size the meeting is, and no matter where you are in the province. I think all of us will make that commitment. We've made it in front of other crowds before. So use us in that way too. Invite us to come out. Use us to help inspire your members and give your members, bigger ideas about where we could be going and where we should be going as a province.
So money, right? So participation, board governance, join our boards, find a way if you're interested to get involved. Organize more workers. And I think, so Alberta has what, I think like 24% of the working population is unionized or so. And that includes CLAC, right? So, and other, yeah, right? So I think there's a bit of a challenge there. The other thing is, I was just thinking about what Gary was saying from the Aspen Foundation this morning, right? That young people, but not exclusively young people, most workers I meet don't have a clue of what unions are. And it's not even that they've been poisoned by the, unions are bad and they're just gonna divide the workplace and they're just gonna take your money or whatever, right? It's that they have no actual idea of what they are. So I think you should also know that we're just some of the friends. That we're the cast of Friends sitting in the cafe right now, right? Chandler over there. So, but people like the Aspen Foundation, like the Workers Resource Center, the Alberta Labour History Institute, I think is going to present tomorrow. But to give us actually they have materials that we can totally use, right? Take advantage of to help mobilize other people. So that's, organize workers, I think disseminate information to current members, but also I think recognize that people outside the labor movement don't know what the labor movement is, don't see a place for themselves in the labor movement. And I'm also challenge and say that people within the labor movement don't see a place for themselves. Here's a little story, okay? So I'm not really proud of this, but I was young. I was like 10 years old, and I would go to my uncle's farm outside of Onaway every summer, and we would walk around the property and we'd collect frogs. I don't know if anyone's ever done this, right? But really fun. Gather up frogs, stick them in a jar, right? So we decimated the population of frogs one summer, and I'm not proud of that. But our intentions were pure. It was just to capture frogs because they were fun, and we stick them in these jars and put a little bit of water in the bottom and some air holes on top so that they keep moist. That was our understanding of it. And after a good afternoon of collecting these things, and it was hot probably as well, not the best ideal conditions for these frogs, we noticed that all the frogs on the bottom were dead, right? And the frogs on the top were struggling to get out, and they were stepping on their friends or their trapped colleagues, right? Yeah, so this is really uplifting. This is the hope of the afternoon. And you've heard this. I mean, this is an analogy like, it's so frogs in a jar, crabs in a bucket. One of the challenges that I see as being part of this labor movement is that we are looking to fight, and the people at the top, the frogs at the top, the ones that have the power or have the voice or happen to be put into those positions at the top, are well-meaning, are looking out for themselves and looking around at the other frogs also clawing at the top, but we critically have to be aware of those frogs at the bottom who are our members, right? Who are people who generally, this is where the analogy breaks apart, but the people at the bottom who don't have voice, who have not been allowed to have voice, and not out of any kind of maliciousness, but because there's no time to see them. So I think one of the challenges is for us to ensure that we are seeing what's in the jar, man. I think we have to be really cognizant of the fact that we need to create space and opportunities for people who are underrepresented. And I look around the room, and I look around, and I question who is not in this room as well, and who needs to be seen. Because the thing with representation is that if you don't see a place for yourself in this room, that's one thing. If you don't see a place for yourself at these tables, then how are you going to see that this union movement, or that the issues, the valid, important issues that we're fighting for, that you are part of them? So I think I would say that, that is a big challenge. And not only is it a challenge, but it's a huge opportunity for labor and for social and civil society groups to actually go, so we have a bunch of people who feel like they don't have voice. Well, what do they want to say? And I guarantee you that some of those issues are going to be exactly the same as what we're fighting for. Justice, equity, inclusion, care for our families, good jobs, an end to precarity, participation in dialogue, safe spaces, safe communities, and a chance to build something where we can all see each other. So that's what I think is the larger issue that labor needs to be a part of and actually has the resources, like we're saying, and also starts from a place where they think that's actually important, which is not the same as other groups out there, that we're looking at a way to build something that is inclusive, that we can move things forward. That's what we need to be doing.
I just wanted to add something to that too, especially when Jared was talking near the beginning of your very eloquent comments there about how we make unions relevant to people that don't know about them, and especially young people. And I think it was great to see that motion passed this morning here on the convention floor about supporting kids that are walking out on the strikes in favor of GSAs. There were also kids that walked out of schools, or I guess it was on their lunch break today, about climate change. And I noticed on Facebook, I got an alert just before lunch saying that there was a Calgary thing happening, and it was a block from here. It was in front of City Hall. So I walked over there. There were 100 students out in front of City Hall chanting, and almost every car passing by honking their horns in support of the kids that are out there. And I think one of the biggest things that we need to do, and that labor and us, I'm including myself in this, is show up when things are happening. And when people who share our values, are mobilizing, we need to be there. And whether you're, even if it's not your issue, if climate change isn't the issue you're passionate about, you still need to show up. Because you know what? When healthcare is the issue, you want the climate change people to show up, right? And we need to support each other. If we're serious about building these coalitions, it can't only be when your issue is the issue. It has to be every time something happens. We need those kids to see those union flags and ask what they mean. And one quick anecdote that I thought about when Jared was talking too, that was personal for me. I grew up with a dad owning a small business, like I said, in Lloydminster. Unions weren't that present visibly. There are unions in Lloydminster, but I didn't know anything about them growing up. My first exposure to labor unions was when I was at the University of Alberta as an undergrad student. There was a group called Make Poverty History that was doing a lot of really active organizing on campus around poverty. And the first union leader I saw was Gil McGowan speaking at a Make Poverty History rally my first year of university. And that's where I learned, was when Gil showed up on campus for an issue that's not maybe something that's as obvious as a labor issue. I think we all think it's a labor issue. We know that in this room. But for me, it wasn't obvious. But when Gil showed up, I noticed it. And that was inspiring to me.
I think one of the... we spoke earlier about kind of the declining popular discourse, and one of the things that Jason Kenney and the UCP did very, very well in the campaign and the lead up to the campaign was to draw a very clear distinction in people's minds between unions and workers. And I think often when we have these conversations, we become guilty of kind of reinforcing that frame. When we talk about unionized workers and non-unionized workers, instead of just talking about workers, it tends to reinforce that frame. So I think that's one of the ways that we need to be careful to not be reinforcing their frames, is to say we're all workers, right? He can draw lines between unions and workers and try and make a distinction, but the reality is that what we need to do is reinforce the fact that we're all workers, and that's critical, and that will help us build alliances too, because there are activist workers who are not unionized. There are activist workers who are unionized in unions that aren't in this room, right? And I think quite often we also become guilty of drawing those lines and saying, there's us and there's them. And that reinforces this kind of division that the Jason Kenneys of the world are seeking to sow between the work of unions and what benefits workers at large. And I think that's an important pushback for all of us.
Well, that's great, and you kind of anticipated a question that I had for you for the group here. And I introduced you when we started off. I said you kind of are civil society, and the groups you represent are quite familiar to me. The time I've been in the labor movement. But which groups out there, they don't even have to be organized groups, but which segment of society should be here? Invited to our convention, and who are you guys working with that we may not be familiar in the labor movement? Is there any? And I'd really like to hear this. And again, what Jared talked about, and Ricardo, and all of you have talked about, who should be at the next convention? Who should we be reaching out to?
I think for us in the work that we do, I'll give you a really good example. I won't tell you a story about a frog because I got tons of those. But we, in the area of pharmacare, which is what everybody thought I was just going to focus on, have been working quite closely with quite a few organizations around the issue of pharmacare and the importance of finally getting it implemented in Canada. And so this has been an ongoing work for the last, very aggressive work, because the advocacy has been there for decades now, but we've been focusing on pharmacare as part of our strategic work that we've done, working alongside Alberta pharmacare working groups. And we do have big organizations that are part of it, but the brunt of the work has been done by organizations such as AFER and Kirk and other seniors groups that normally don't get invited to witness conventions such as this. Those seniors groups are the ones that, for example, that we rely on to support our campaigns, to sign our petitions, to contact their MLAs, to do all kinds of work that sometimes our members are too busy or too busy raising a family or working that they're not able to do so. So for us, engaging with seniors groups that may or may not be active until we talk to them is one of those big things. And I would love to see more of those groups reflected here. And then as well, like, Joel was talking about how we need to be there, but perhaps like in aligning with the youth movement. But sometimes people just need to have those spaces created for them without having us participating, but not as lead actors. That's what I'm trying to say. So we need to let them know. And those are the kinds of people that I would love to see engage and learn about labor and learn about how things are done. Because I think when I became the executive director of Friends of Medicare was the first time that I actually got to attend an Alberta Federation of Labor convention, because AUP is not part of this great organization. So for me, learning about how things are done at this level was an amazing experience. And I think, and this is after I've been a labor activist since 1987. And so giving the opportunity to those people that don't normally participate in the labor movement is a great way of engaging people that are outside and that would find a common ground in terms of working with some of the issues that we all talk about during conventions such as this.
I think that, so the question is, who do you like to see here at this convention next year or next time? Yeah, I think it starts before that, actually. So if the goal is to get people here, then the question is, what kind of outreach actions do we have to take? So really intentional actions that we have to do. Again, who's not here? Who do we want? Who do we have in our own communities that we go, this is my labor world and this is my home neighborhood world or whatever. We all have these intersections with different things, right? So I am interested in having representation of a diversity of working people. I think as well, it would be interesting to get, we talk about a worker is a worker is a worker, not just the union, but the worker side. But there's a lot of us who are not workers. And I'm interested in putting that out there as well, right? Who are the people that don't get captured with even that worker definition? I'd be very interested in having multiple generations present to talk about issues that are affecting them. I'm in the sandwich, is anyone here in the sandwich generation? We've got parents that are approaching, you need to be able to take care of them and kids as well. So I'm interested on a personal level there. And I think I'm interested in particularly ethnocultural community groups and places that have actually a rich history of organizing, but are fairly invisible. outside of sort of the labor movement and other kind of more formalized organizations. So I think it's interesting to do some outreach. I think the district labor councils may have a hand in that, to say, well, we're having an event, let's open this up, right? We're having a conference, let's open this up to outside of our regular folks. Day of mourning ceremonies, where I know there's a lot of labor participation, and I wonder, who else can we reach out to so we can actually use that as a gateway in. And we also have to recognize that there are some other activist groups out there who are well organized, migrante or migrant worker organizations, both in Alberta and outside of Alberta. So we can learn from their struggles, their barriers, and how organizing works within different contexts as well. I think would be rich for us.
Yeah, I think that's one of the realities, is that there's two kind of fronts to that question, right? The one front is who needs to be in this room, in the sense of who are the people within your unions, within your locals, who, as you look around, like Jared said, that you don't see at the table, and how can you find ways within your organizing to kind of raise those voices up and raise those people to the point where maybe they come into this room, right? The other part of it is who do we work with? Who do we reach out to? Which voices do we help support, right? And one of the challenges is that we do tend to think in terms of organizations, right? These structures that represent how we did things maybe 20 years ago or maybe even 10 years ago. And that's not necessarily the way that organizing and activism is happening today. My kids, who are 22, are part of this loosely affiliated, no-name group of folks who communicate with each other through Snapchat and social media and a bunch of other places to track where the yellow vesters in Edmonton are gathering on any particular Saturday and deploy a group of people out there. They're doing tremendous work. They're organizing. There's no organization name. There's no leader, right? But they can consistently get anywhere from 20 to 50 people to show up and shout down the fascists, right? So how do we find ways to reach out to those folks? How do we find ways to engage with those folks and give them some say here, right? One of the young environmental groups, we're still talking and discussing about how we develop a coordinated fight back and how we organize to fight back against this new government and all of those things. Within 48 hours of the election, the GSA walkout this morning was organized, the climate strike was organized, and one of the up-and-coming Edmonton environmental justice groups got online and raised $15,000 to create their own war room to push back against Kenny's war room. These are the kind of things that are happening quickly, and these are the kind of things that are being organized in ways that we are not necessarily familiar with, and that's what we need to wrap our heads about. And that comes from reaching out, from talking to people, and from actually being open to new ways of doing things and different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And I think for us, one of the biggest reasons we were created was to do coalition building. And so I'm going to talk more about the more traditional kinds of organizations that we bring together on our task forces. And that's a lot of what coordinates the work we do, for example, in K-12 education, or in Seniors Care is a great example, where we have about 15 different seniors organizations that are almost all volunteer-led, that come together about every 6 weeks and discuss with us and with members of the United Nurses of Alberta, with Health Sciences Association, and with AUPE, and have discussions with those labor groups on a regular basis about what we need to be focusing on in the province. And so I think we've come up with at least one solution to how we do that, is create these kinds of structures where we can come together regularly and bring labor into the room to talk to other groups that have similar values, where we know we can connect, and where there's a lot of I think appetite for some kind of direct action. And this is getting to be an old example now, but when Fred Horn was health minister prior to the NDP being elected, and he was trying to dismantle universal pharmacare for seniors in Alberta, it was our seniors task force, not driven from the people who are necessarily paid to do it, but from the volunteers who lead that task force, who decided to go and occupy his office until he would meet with seniors groups and talk about what this was going to do. And it was not long after that he backed off and said, okay, you can keep your universal pharmacare. But that comes from bringing those organizations together, and if you don't have a regular way to do that, then I think that's a problem. And I agree that it can't just be at conventions, and we have our own conference where we try to bring people, but it has to be beyond those annual or biannual events about meaningfully engaging, and when you're doing your work out there advocating politically, whether it's lobbying at the legislature or whether it's handing out pamphlets or hosting a barbecue, bringing those groups into those kinds of more routine or more frequent activities and making them a part of it. And so I'd like to see a lot more of that happening, and again, I include myself in that. I don't like to tell others what they should do without saying I need to do something myself. I think we all need to do that better.
Can I just chime in here? So on a really selfish level, they're going to get really bogged down in like serious stuff and really engaging, touching stories about frogs.
Yeah, we should have had a warning about that.
Yeah, but I think I would love to see happen throughout the labor movement is artists.
Yes.
I would love to see poets and storytellers and dancers and painters and musicians. I would love to see the people who are workers, who don't necessarily identify themselves as workers and are very precariously employed, but who have that thing that we need to be able to communicate human values and human needs, and to actually raise things up so that this is a party and not a place where you're sitting for like 8 hours a day, right? But there's an ability to actually lift the level of so it's not arguments, it's not sort of a polite discourse sitting on couches or whatever. It is something to be a part of. And a way to reach out to those different communities who all have artists in them, and probably people in this room as well. We can draw on the wealth that we have here too.
It's Pete Seeger's 100th birthday today, by the way. Today, yeah.
I know. Okay, so you all kind of touched on it, and there's something I wanted to ask you guys about. Okay, advocacy. How do we go out there? And I'll only talk about myself, within my union and things like that. A lot of times, when we're trying to connect with our members, and outside, we're a little late to the party. And I've been to many, many meetings, and it's, we have to get on social media. And, that's an easy thing to say. But I guess I would ask you guys, and I think, I think you're going to be the forefront of this, like, what does advocacy look like now? And Joel, you touched on it a little bit, and it's no one thing, but, as an older guy, what's the cool thing right now to actually get in touch with people and in a meaningful way that you guys are finding?
Yeah, I mean, social media is important, but sometimes I think that's overstated. I think it's one of the many ways that we communicate as people now, and that's changed advocacy and a whole lot of other things. But I think, person-to-person interaction is still the most important way that you can connect with people. If you want to change, you don't change somebody's mind by broadcasting the right argument to them, and you usually don't change a stranger's mind either. I often think going back to the evangelical church I grew up in Lloydminster. So yeah, the background gets worse, right? Not that it's bad, but it was a very politically conservative environment is what I mean by that. And I still go back once in a while to my family, and I used to post a lot more on Facebook from my personal account, but I would post all of the things I thought people should read, right? Post all of this progressive political news that people should be paying attention to. And I'd come back to the church that I grew up in, a couple of times a year, and when people saw me, they would say, "Hey, I haven't talked to you in forever, but I read all the stuff you post on Facebook." And they say, I don't usually engage, but I'm reading it, and it's the only place I get news from. And that made me pause, and it made me think, maybe, Facebook isn't going to necessarily change the world, but it in a lot of ways, well, it did, but I don't mean it in that way. I mean, changing people's minds happens when you connect with people that already trust you. These people were reading what I posted because of who I am and because they knew who I was growing up and they knew my family. And they did take those things seriously because they trusted me already. And so that's a lesson that goes beyond Facebook. It's not just about, keep posting to Facebook, keep doing that, but talk to the people that trust you about the issues, and especially, you guys work, or a lot of you do, in frontline public services, and those of you who don't work in public services know through this organization and other interactions why public services are so important. Like, those issues better than anybody, certainly better than most of the politicians, and hopefully you know that by now. But inform people that already trust you, that you have a strong connection with, that aren't already engaged in these issues, and tell them about why these things are important to you and the kinds of things that you learn when you come to gatherings like this. And that's your real opportunity, I think, is engaging people at that level, and over time, not arguing with them, but providing them with the information, saying, this is what's actually happening out there, and we need to do something about it.
Just to build on what Joel was saying, when I graduated from university a long time ago, my dad said to me, I'm really proud of you. You're the first member of our family to graduate from university, but what you're able to communicate, if I as a simple worker, my dad was a machinist, and he always used to refer to himself as that, if I can't understand what you're talking about, then your education is not worth anything. And so I go drinking at the Lizard Lounge almost every Friday or Saturday. And I always see people there that say to me, hey, I saw you on TV. I don't know what the F you were talking about, but you were on TV. So my goal in life has always been to be able to reach that point of communicating to people at a level that everybody can understand, not demeaning people that don't have formal education, because that's just as important. It's actually being able to communicate your message in an effective way that it resonates with absolutely everybody. Because I think everybody understands that if we don't have public health care, if we don't have public services, then our society is not an equal society. And for the advocacy that we need to do, I think we have the good place that we're at in 2019 is that we have organizations such as the ones that are here. We have labor organizations that are strong, that have research, that have the availability of Parkland, who does awesome work for us. We have had tons of experiments, for example, in privatization of healthcare that have not worked, that we can go back to and say, don't privatize surgical facilities. We tried that in 2010 with health resource centers. Saskatchewan invested millions of dollars in their private surgical initiative, which is what Kenny wants to do here. And it worked only because the government was giving them millions of dollars. Now they have private surgical facilities, and the government is not in a place where they can continue to fund it at the level that they were funding, and now their wait times are just as high, if not higher, than before they implemented this surgery. We have all that stuff on our side. We're organized. We have experience. We have the ability to mobilize and respond quickly, because that's exactly what Kenny's going to do. He's going to come in here. He's already announced the fact that he's going to stop the reversal of the privatization of the labs, even though we had tons of evidence to say that privatizing lab services is not in the best interest of Albertans, that we were going to lose millions of dollars to an international, multinational company from Australia. So how do we get all that information in a manner that's out there that everybody understands that is going to be our advocacy goal for 2019, 2020, and whatever 4 more years that happens to end up in? I'm not good in math. But I think our advocacy needs to take all of that stuff into consideration so that we're in a position of strength. And I'm not feeling sad or scared. I think it's a great time for us to be feeling motivated and to know that we have a real task ahead of us. In Chow Lee, for example, before he left to France, he indicated that he's leaving Canada because Canadians are not ready. As long as there's organizations such as Friends of Medicare, Canadians will never understand the benefits of private for-profit health care. I'm just tooting our horn here. And Danielle Smith in 2010, in a fundraising speech that she gave, she said that she wanted to form a government that's not scared of Friends of Medicare. So there you go. We know that Friends of Medicare, who's made up of awesome organizations, awesome community members, awesome and strong people, well-organized people, will be able to advocate and take any of these challenges head on.
Yeah. There are no shortcuts. I think that's one of the things we have to keep like front of mind, is that there are no shortcuts. The revolution is not just a t-shirt or a commercial or a meme or a tweet or an infographic away. Those things can help get messages and information out, but there really are no shortcuts to what we know. Talk to people, get on their doors, call them, speak to people one-on-one about ideas, about values, about beliefs. That's the bottom line. Advocacy, what works in advocacy hasn't changed. Yes, social media exists. Yes, there's Google and computers and all of that stuff. But what fundamentally works has not changed. And that's still having the conversations one-on-one with people. And as I said earlier, sometimes those conversations are hard. Parkland is an organization. We haven't changed the way we work since we were founded. We haven't changed our mandate. Our mandate is to do research, to put out policy alternatives that push the envelope to create debate and discussion, to contribute to democracy, to broaden the scope of discourse. We haven't changed how we work. We didn't change how we work in 2015, and we're not going to change how we work now. We're going to keep doing the same thing. Because we pushed the envelope, and on a personal level, through the columns that I've written over the years, I get a ton of hate mail. A ton of hate mail. The one that sticks out in my mind, which came in the last few months, and it really sticks in my mind, and you'll see why when I tell you what it was a message from a person who didn't like something I wrote in a column, and wrote to me that he couldn't wait until Jason Kenney got elected, and sent me back to whatever shithole Latin American country I came from. Right? I engage with everybody that sends me hate mail. I respond to every piece. And the response is usually, I'm going to put aside all the angry, hateful stuff you've got in your message, and I want you to tell me what exactly in what I wrote is wrong or what you disagree with. And if you want to do that, then we can have a conversation. Right? And what people do, two things surprise me. 8 out of 10 people that I do that with write back and respond to that. And everybody that writes back starts their message with, wow, I wasn't expecting an answer. And apologizes for the hateful shit they put at the front of it, and then starts engaging in discussions about what they disagreed with in my column. There are no shortcuts for doing the hard work of having conversations, and sometimes it's tough. And like I said earlier, if somebody yells at you, your reaction is going to be to yell back. And I dare say that's how we got where we are today, where all we're doing is yelling at each other and no longer having conversations about ideas.
So just to add to that, I think that there's something tangible that unions can do, and that is continue to invest in education for your members, because that actually is a mechanism where you can get workers of diverse opinions and backgrounds into a room together over a prolonged period of time to actually start talking about this stuff. And it's a great place to disseminate the information, the research that we're talking about here, so that everyone is literally on the same page and can start to have that discussion. The other thing is to recognize, just in terms of what Ricardo was saying, is that some people in this fight are going to bear the brunt more than others. And therefore, another mechanism that has to be set up by unions is to ensure that there is some sort of support for people who are going to be at the front line of the hate that is going to be coming in reaction to unpopular opinions that are put out there. Yeah.
So, and again, I think this has been a fantastic discussion. I've got a couple more questions, and again, the panel's kind of stole my thunder a little bit and talked about this, but, and Ricardo, right off the top, you said, we've been here before, in Alberta. We almost 100 years of right-wing governments, and we had 4 years of, progressive government, and we can look back at the 90s, when I first became active in the fight back against Klein, and you just talked about it, but at that time, there wasn't this open forum for hate. We didn't have fascists marching openly in the streets. They were there, but they didn't feel comfortable coming out. So if we think back to those fights that we had in the 90s, and we did have success, if, goodness knows what we're going to be facing. We've probably got some good ideas about it. But, have things fundamentally changed for your groups, doing the advocacy, and of course you just talked about it, but, with the differences in the vitriol and the extreme positions, and I'll start with you, Joel, but, there does seem to be a real, much more extreme opinions that we face.
Yeah, I think, definitely it's concerning to see the white supremacists and racists and homophobes and misogynists and all of those groups be emboldened. And, I think the election of Trump was a big part of that, but it was happening before that. Trump was elected in a context that sort of was conducive to that. And, we're seeing sort of the next wave of those right-wing, were they called dickheads earlier? Is that what they were? Seeing Doug Ford and now Jason Kenney, and there's a whole lineup of them now. I think that's definitely really concerning. One thing, and this kind of goes back to a couple of different previous questions, but one thing we have to keep in mind is that there are lots of things that don't change about the way that we do our work. When we're talking about influencing the public discussion and having these one-on-one conversations and engaging meaningfully with people around us, I think that's something, and pushing the envelope and being bold, that's something that shouldn't change with governments. It's great when we're getting victories, when we're making progress, and it was so inspiring to see things like the $15 an hour minimum wage, to see some action finally on climate change. And, we could go on, obviously, for a really long time about all of the great things that happened over the past 4 years and the progress we made. But the actual way we do advocacy and the way that we talk to our coworkers and our fellow union activists and our neighbors and family members, that doesn't change. That advocacy work, which I think is the most important kind of core work of moving the province forward, we need to keep doing that and keep being bold. It doesn't, if you're a supporter of whatever party is in power, you don't necessarily need to agree with them on everything they do either. You can talk about why what they're doing is important and what is positive about it, but we need to constantly be challenging anything that's happening, whether it's an attack or whether it's progress. We need to be challenging and talking. I guess this is more relevant now to under the current government, but when we see these attacks as well, we need to be defensive, obviously. We want to protect what we have. We want to protect, the valuable healthcare and education systems and seniors care and the progress we made on childcare. But we still need to be providing a positive vision for where we go to and talk about why the status quo isn't good enough. And I think we got into that kind of trap over the past 4 years of too often, and especially as we led up to this election, defending where we are at now and not looking into the future and not looking at what the next step is and moving things to the next level. And I think we need to be doing that in our messages and in our conversations, no matter what party is in power. So we need to keep that going and keep that positive frame even while we're defending against attacks on public services. We need to keep talking about universal child care and about taking the science of climate change seriously and about public delivery of health care, and Sandra's got lots of things that I won't steal from her. But talk about those bold ideas and keep them going and never stop, no matter how the context changes, keep those bold ideas alive.
Thank you for not stealing anything. We've actually definitely seen a change in the rhetoric and the conversation and some of the things that we hear. And more often now we're hearing things like, oh, you just want a government monopoly of healthcare. You want a government monopoly of this and that. And that's completely American rhetoric. And we know that. Canadians know that. Albertans know that. We also hear all the time that, that Drew Barnes used to throw this in the ledger all the time, that we had socialist laundry in Medicine Hat when the government decided to reverse the privatization of laundry services in Medicine Hat. But what we weren't talking about is the fact that those services in Medicine Hat expand all across of southern Alberta, that they not only provide laundry services for that hospital, but they also provide laundry services for all the continuing care centers in that area. And that privatizing and then taking it out of that community would have meant that these these facilities would have had to wait for their laundry to be delivered. So instead of talking about the need for us to invest in the infrastructure and the equipment, because that hospital also has the highest rate of injuries in the laundry department, we weren't talking about that. We were just letting it kind of, and I think Joel talked about the status quo. We know that there's a lot of things that need to be addressed in our healthcare system that is not perfect, but we have a solid foundation from which to build on. What we want to see in our healthcare so that we can move this rhetoric along is the fact and narrative along, is that we need to find a cultural change within our conversations that we have around healthcare, that we need to call out the corporatization, the marketization, the commodification of our healthcare system, and turn it into what it truly should be, which is a very important and a cornerstone public service that everybody needs. And so I guess in a lot of ways is again, and I'll go back to that, is just rescuing the values that created our healthcare system to begin with, and not allowing any of this other stuff, other fluff, to take away from what we need to do.
Yeah, just building on that and Joel's comments in particular, that in many ways, one of the things I think we realized in 2015 is that we'd gotten very, very good at playing defense and had not really had any practice on offense. And when we were in a position of being truly propositional, of pushing new ideas and advances forward, we weren't ready. We weren't prepared. And I think the biggest kind of context changer we can take forward with us is, yes, of course, we're in a position where we're going to be flexing that defense muscle again, and we're going to be flexing it a lot. Many of us haven't been on the steps of the legislature in over 4 years, right? We're going to be there a lot in the next 4 years, guaranteed. But at the same time, we need to be aware of that need to be propositional, of saying, yes, we don't want to go backwards from the status quo, but highlighting again that the status quo is not enough. The status quo is not what we fought for. The status quo is insufficient. This government, the NDP government, did over the past 4 years a lot of things. They did a lot of things. But because of how far back Alberta was, most of those things took us to the middle of the pile across Canada. We're not, after a 4-year NDP government, we're not national leaders on our healthcare system. We're not national leaders on our labor policy. We're not national leaders on our occupational health and safety. The only thing we are, and that's going to be brief, national leaders on is the minimum wage, right? So we're not where we wanted to be. We need to be more propositional. We need to push. We need to create the ideas for what it is we're trying to build. And we need to do that, as I said at the beginning, in the very first round, do that based on evidence, so that once there is a government that's open to those ideas, there is already support for the Alberta that we want to build. If we're not propositional, we'll play defense for 4 more years, and if there is a government by some chance in the future that happens to listen to us again, we will not have done the groundwork for what we want to build. All we've been able to do is defend. So I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we've taken away at Parkland Institute. Even during the Klein years, we made a conscious decision to not just critique public policy, but to propose public policy and identify what we could have, identify the ideals of where we could and should be. And I think we need to do more of that right now. Because the instinct is going to be to go on defense, and we're going to need to, but we can't stop flexing that propositional muscle.
So I became the executive director just right before the election happened in 2015. And so my experience as part of the Workers' Health Center has actually been not, I guess, what had happened in the years before. We had, like a lot of us in this room, we had unprecedented access to the government. We were involved. First of all, they had consultation. And secondly, workers were invited to these consultation things. And not just 1 or 2, but like weekly, right? Things were happening. And so in terms of advocacy, that's a real shift for an organization like us. We're a charity, so we actually don't do the same kind of on-the-ground advocacy work as you do. But we had an opportunity to learn from the workers that we encounter and bring those stories forward that would be able to influence policy change. And I think that's going to drastically change. One is that they're going to remove mechanisms for consultation. They've actually run on that. We don't want to. We're just going to run things through. The other thing is it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they do what the summer of repeal, whatever that might look like, is I think even if they were to leave legislation intact, they could simply remove the capacity for workers to meaningfully be involved in consulting on various agencies, boards, and commissions. They could get rid of that worker voice or that progressive voice, right? And so, and at the same time, just cut all funding and resourcing to anything that would actually see workers achieve support. So enforcement of health and safety, cut back on all of the enforcement, right? So that's sort of a doom and gloom thing, but I think there's a lot of questions about what is our capacity, what are the formal mechanisms to participate and to move things forward, and assuming possibly that there aren't going to be any, or going to be very reduced capacity to do so, then it comes back to this coalition building. It's about figuring out what are the common goals and being able to respond in a timely fashion, like you're saying, and also at the same time being aware that the work that we had, the stuff that I'm very proud of all of us in the room advocating for to move towards these significant changes, were just the beginning. That we need to not lose sight of the fact that we were fighting for the beginning of something, anticipating that we'd be able to continue to build something that we really want to see. So,
Well, thanks everybody, and this has been a really great discussion, and I could keep going for a couple hours, but I think we do have some business at the convention. So, just as a last question to everybody, and I'll start with Jared at the end. How can folks connect with you, your organization, over the coming days and weeks and months? And I'll ask the same question to all the panel. And how can we here today, keep in touch with your organization, support you, and go forward?
yeah. Well, we'll be sitting here for the rest of the convention, so just feel free to come up, have a coffee. We all have tables outside, and so I think meaningfully is. For the labor movement, for the AFL, thank you for your current support, and we need to continue that support in terms of assessments to keep us going. We do a lot of prevention work, and that's operating funding that is necessary to keep our doors open so we can continue to do things. That's different than a one-off project, which is really hard to do if you don't have an organization. When we're talking about, I'm going to speak mostly about the other organizations on this panel here, is the reason that we actually may have the capacity to fight is because these organizations have existed. Were built by labor, supported by labor, over the past couple decades. And so we already have the groundwork in place. So it is crucial that that support remains at the current levels. And as we've already said, more money doesn't hurt. In fact, can help to move certain projects and initiatives forward. I think if you can communicate the good work that us organizations, others that we've heard from as guests in different capacities over the course of this convention, disseminate our information out. Reach out to us. There's brochures and things. There's literature. There's websites. Come to our table. A specific ask for the Workers' Health Center would be that we have a silent auction going on with lots of really cool stuff. And that runs until Saturday afternoon, and all the proceeds go towards our worker education, our Workplace Schools program, which uses theater to go into schools across the province, and we educate about 10,000 workers every year on the rights to safe, healthy, and fair workplaces. So all proceeds will go towards that from silent auction. We also have a live auction of mysterious mystery items happening on Saturday night as part of the Dance and Social. Come out to that. It's going to be a good time. What else can I say? There's another project actually, and you'll hear from the Alberta Labour History Institute tomorrow. We're partnering with them on a new project that is called Success Stories, Worker Participation in Health and Safety. And what we're looking at is identifying and interviewing workers who tend to be more vulnerable to health and safety issues, who maybe are not represented in current health and safety education videos and things like that. So we can gather worker stories on how they've been involved successfully in participation in health and safety. And that can be from what I did was I raised a complaint, I sat on my joint health and safety committee, I voted for a member for my health and safety committee, I went on a wildcat strike, I lobbied for legislative change, or I asked a question about health and safety. safety, or I talk to someone about a health and safety issue. I'm really interested in a continuum of different things, and the end goal would be for ALHI to collect these interviews so they're preserved and then are shared with the provincial archives. And the other thing is that we're going to take that information, create an educational video we can use in courses that unions can then use to go, how do you participate? What does it mean to participate in health and safety? And the goal, of course, is to build activists, both inside the workplace and outside. If you participate in your workplace, that may be a model for participating in society at large. So you can come and talk to me afterwards as well, and I'd be happy to chat more. Thanks.
Pretty much the same stuff. We've got a display table outside that's got some examples of some of our reports. parklandinstitute.ca, all of our reports are free online in PDF. We've got a blog up there, our op-eds are up there. We're just starting to plan for our annual conference in November. It's a publicly accessible conference. We hold it at the U of A because we get a free venue there, but it's a publicly accessible conference. This year we're going to be looking at questions of populism and fight backs and those kind of things at our conference. So we've got little flyers, save the date flyers at our table over there. I'll be here for the rest of the weekend. Our communications coordinator, Scott Harris, is here as a delegate, so he'll be here for the rest of the weekend as well. Come up to us, talk to us. One of the things that happened to us in 2015 after the election of the NDP was that our individual donations kind of fell off a cliff. And one of the things that we try to do is balance our revenue stream between labor unions and organizations and individuals. And our individual giving fell off a cliff in 2015. I don't know if people thought that we weren't necessary anymore. I don't know if people started to redirect their funds towards partisan activities, but we need to rebuild that. And it also makes it easier for you as union leaders, because I'll show up at your doors less often asking for union dollars. If you can help us reach out to your membership somehow and try and encourage them to become individual donors. We issue charitable tax receipts. We're part of the University of Alberta, so we can have conversations about that, about ways to actually reach your members with some individual fundraising drives. And as Joel said earlier, we're available, myself, our researchers, available to travel the province and come out to speak to any size group about anything at all, even remotely related to public policy. We're happy to come have those conversations. Sometimes that also takes some steam off of you as union leaders, because I can say stuff and be provocative at a podium in ways that you can't necessarily be with your membership, and I can take some of that steam and engage in some of those conversations. So please keep that in mind as you plan your activities and engagement over the course of the next couple of years. Thank you.
And I'll be really quick. We also have a table out there, and if you go and meet with Alyssa Pretty, who's our communications officer, wave Alyssa, she can get your membership renewed. We also count on annual members' donations from individuals to build on the work that we are currently doing. We also, if you can, invite you to participate in our chapters that we have across the province. We just restarted our chapter here in Calgary. Alex Chevalier was elected the chair. And so if you live in Calgary and you like to participate, we're also starting to work on Lethbridge. We have one we need one in Red Deer. So those are the kinds of areas that we can get you to participate in. We have our AGM coming up on June the 15th here in Calgary at the Health Sciences Building. And we will be celebrating our 40th anniversary on September the 26th. Hopefully you'll be able to join us. We will have a song that has been commissioned by Maria Dunn to celebrate some of the important work and recognize some of our achievements throughout the years. And so hopefully you'll join us. And send us stories. We'll also be starting to coordinate meet and greet with the new MLAs. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to meet with the new Minister of Health, who happens to be Tyler Shandro. He's a lawyer who was part of the parole board, but I don't think he's ever worked around healthcare. So let's help him learn about healthcare. So definitely contact us if you want to be part of these MLA meet and greets, and we'll get going on that as soon as possible. And again, thank you for all your support and continued support for the work that Friends of Medicare does, which impacts everybody. Thank you.
I really want to thank the AFL for giving us this opportunity to be in front of you and to get some time to really explore some of the issues in depth. I think we all really appreciate that, and also the financial support. We couldn't do it without you guys, and you founded us, and you're the reason that we're up here and able to do this, and the reason why we're out in communities and spreading the message about these issues. I did want to second what Ricardo said about being able to be provocative, and one way that we've done that I realized I didn't touch on, even though it's on the agenda, is I'm supposed to talk about revenue reform. We've been doing a ton of work over the past year about changing the conversation about taxes in the province, and that's an absolutely critical one that touches a whole lot of issues, and it's something that we'll continue to work on. But come see me at our table out there, and sign up for our e-newsletter is one thing I'll tell you if you're not on our e-news list, that you can do to stay updated on what we're doing so that you know, and then when we're in your community, we can find ways to connect and invite us out to your community if we're not already planning to be there. So I really look forward to more conversations with you guys, but thanks so much for everything that we're seeing this weekend. This has been such a great experience for me, so appreciate being here.
Thank you, Joel, Sandra, Ricardo, and Jared. This has been a great discussion, and I'll just say I was humbled to be part of it up here on the stage with you folks. Of course, for all our AFL speakers, I have gifts which I will hand out. But while I'm doing that, can you please give just a great thank you. Let's have a big thank you for these folks and all the good information they've given us.